on the issue of Korean unification and the roles and the future of the ROK and U.S. alliance. As you know well, currently in Korean, surrounding Korean peninsula, North Korean nuclear issue is more urgent and significant, dominating our discussions to address how to make a breakthrough in denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. But still, we believe that issue of the Korean unification is more important and very future-oriented task for Korean people as well as the regional countries. So many debates on the scenarios and process of unification has been proceeded. And out of the frustrations over the North Korean nuclear issues, President Park Geun-hye, one time, she mentioned that the ultimate solution of both North Korean nuclear issues as well as the human rights can be realized through eventual reunification. Because united Korea, one Korea, will be nuclear-free and fully democratized country respecting basic universal values and human rights of all Korean people. In that context, today's discussions will focus on the topics, particularly the position and attitude of the neighboring countries, Korea, Japan, and China, because as we witnessed in the case of German reunification, the cooperation from the neighboring countries is vital to realize our dreams of the reunification. So we have now 4 speakers and 1 designated discussant. We have now Scott Snyder is well known, a scholar, U.S. scholars from the Council on Foreign Relations, United States, and 2 professors from IFANS, the Institute of Foreign Affairs and National Security under Foreign Ministry, Professor Kim Hyun-wook and In Nam-sik, and Professor Nishino Junya, professor from Keio University, Japan, and lastly, Professor Xiao He, Renmin University of China. So altogether 5 presenters and discussants will speak first, and then we'll open the floor to have the Q&A sessions. So because we have time limit, I'll give all presenters 5 to 7 minutes to presentation, and then we'll open the floor to get the questions to be addressed from 5 speakers. First speaker will be Dr. Scott Snyder.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Shin, and thank you to Jeju Peace Forum, and also, I guess, IFANS for putting together this particular panel. Thank you to Hyun-wook for the invitation. So the subject really is Korean unification and the U.S.-Korea alliance. My current research is really about the history and evolution of South Korean foreign policy and the alliance. And one of the, I think, central tensions that has existed in the alliance discussion between the U.S. and South Korea has actually been the tension over the objectives of stabilization versus unification. If you actually go back to the post-Korean War period, Syngman Rhee still wanted to march north, but the alliance was really created for the purpose of trying to stabilize the situation on the peninsula. And then over time, I think that what we have seen is a convergence between the U.S. and South Korea rhetorically over the desirability of unification. But I would say that even today and in the future, there is the possibility of some tension between the U.S. and South Korea over the relative priority of stabilization versus unification. And it will be particularly challenging, I think, to manage those particular tensions, especially in the event of some kind of instability internally in North Korea. Second point I want to make is that really when we think about Korean unification, all the scenarios and actions of the various parties are path dependent. And it seems to me that the key variables are related to the pace, is it gradual or sudden, and the nature of the unification process. Is it peaceful or is it violent? And then from that flows a lot of different possibilities for how things might develop. But one of the issues that I've been particularly interested in is the challenge that I think both the U.S. and South Korea face and that China face in the context of potential instability in North Korea and the question of intervention. And it seems to me that any actor that thinks about intervening in North Korea for the purpose of trying to stabilize the situation faces a kind of what I call an intervention legitimacy paradox. And that means that the first mover may want to intervene in order to stabilize, but it also has to think about the effect of intervention on international perceptions of the legitimacy of intervention. And so I think that that is a particularly interesting challenge that both the U.S. and ROK and China would face in the context of instability in North Korea. And then longer term, I would say that I think that the future durability of the U.S.-Korea alliance post-unification, yes, I think the U.S. will have an interest in trying to maintain the alliance relationship with a post-unification Korea. But from my perspective, the key driver is probably going to be the demand factor. And what I mean by that is that I think that the debate in a unified Korea, especially in the context of reconstruction of a unified Korea, is going to be one in which there's going to be a desire to have the United States as a distant, benevolent power engaged in Korea. It's the same kind of debate that existed in Korea around foreign policy choices at the end of the 19th century, actually. And then I guess the final point that I would like to make is related to the importance of Sino-U.S. relations as a contextual factor and the likelihood that in the context of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, there's probably going to be a desire on the part of South Korea and an expectation of the United States that there's kind of a division of labor in the context of unification where South Korea is focusing on integration, or a unified Korea is focused on reconstruction and integration. But there's an expectation on the part of South Koreans that the United States is going to be helping to talk in the region and try to develop some kind of regional stability framework. And there I would simply say that the U.S.-Korea alliance will remain important as a means by which to assure Korean security unless and until we see the establishment of a durable and trust-based multilateral framework that might possibly theoretically replace the need for the alliance. I think that's going to be a fundamental principle or fact of life in terms of the way that a unified Korea will look at the situation, and frankly, a fact of life in terms of what would be necessary to have a durable peace in Northeast Asia. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Very concise and clear view and perspective from United States, from Scott Snyder. Next to speaker, in the order of the we are sitting, the Professor Chen Xiaohe from Renmin University.
Thank you, Ambassador Chins. And also, I'd like to thank the IFANs and the KDAs for your kind invitations. And this is my third visit to Jeju, and the second time to attend Jeju forums. So it's a great honor to get together with old friends and get to know new friends. And I'd like to discuss a little bit about Korean unification and the role and the future of ROK-US alliance. And in the first place, we see the Korean national unifications in Koreans' long histories since the end of the Second World War. The national unification become assumptions within people's reach. You see, China also is a divided nation. And cross-Taiwan Strait relations, you see, become complicated and may worsen off in the near futures. And some of the Chinese military generals predict that national unification will take place within 30 years. That's the case for China. But I think it's for Koreans' national unifications, the possibilities seemingly is much higher than China's national unifications for a number of reasons. Number one, you see, is the South Koreans' power overwhelmed DPRK's powers, economically, even militarily. Second, the leadership. President Pyongyang certainly is a democratic elected president, and many people don't like her, but she is enjoying high reputation in China, and I think she is able person, will be an excellent president in comparison with the leaders in DPRK's, Kim Jong-un's, Yang's, hereditary leaders, compulsive, and from my observations, and he has made many mistakes. Some mistakes are very big. And also, third reasons, when we examine external support, and ROK and the United States alliance in the past years has been strengthened. And I think it's a strengthened alliance between two countries will continue on for the foreseeable future. But the DPRK's case, and I think it's another stories, present another stories. This is bad and isolated countries. Its relationship with United States, with ROKs, failed to improve. And the relationship with traditional ally like China in the past 1 or 2 years deteriorated in a very tangible ways. So in terms of external assistance, support, ROK in a very good position, strong positions, and DPRK in a weak positions. And what the Korean unification needs right now is a historical chance. And I think it's DPRK's stubborn refuse to abandon its nuclear programs. I think it offers some kind of historic chance. So, for the ROK and U.S. alliance, I think it's China harbored mixed feelings. In the 1950s, allies was China's dead enemies. In 1960s, same case. But the perceptions changed a little bit. Changed in the dramatic ways when China and the United States reached out to each other, particularly after Nixon's visit to China. And in 1973, China once proposed to form an international united front, or in other words, international coalitions against the Soviet Union. And China wanted United States to be the leader of these coalitions. And these coalitions, according to China's leaders, Mao Zedong's, was composed by countries, include United States, Japan, China, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, and East European countries. And in the very next years, Mao Zedong expanded such a kind of coalition to include the countries with closer relationship with the countries I just mentioned a little bit earlier. So, ROK and U.S. alliance could become China's potential strategic asset to counter the Soviet Union. Now, frankly speaking, Mao Zedong's grand international coalitions never ever formed because the United States at that time was not interested in such a kind of coalition against the Soviet Union. The United States wanted to play a balanced power games. But since the Cold War, since the end of the Cold Wars, China's perceptions of the alliance has been imbued with suspicions, hostilities, and such a kind of perceptions, mixed perceptions, was further strengthened by the brawl over the THAAD systems, THAAD. But for the Korean unifications, the ROK United States alliance could play two roles. One's defensive roles, another one's offensive roles. On the defensive front, and the alliance is necessary security guarantees for South Korea to survive in its competitions with North Korea. Simply Seoul and other key South Korean cities are within the shooting range of DPRK's artilleries and rockets. So the security vulnerabilities of the DPRKs, of the South Koreans, needs the alliance. And also, when the DPRK has developed nuclear weapons, and the alliance is another security guarantee for South Koreans to get nuclear umbrellas from the United States. We call it extended deterrence. And these factors become increasingly important in the strategic calculations in Seoul and Washington. And also, in addition to the two major defensive roles, and this alliance could also serve as a diplomatic security instrument to hedge against China's rise. United States and China now are bogged down in heated rivalries, strategic rivalries. And I think as many South Koreans believe they could not trust China very much. They need some kind of security guarantees in case relationship between China and the South Koreans worsen off, so they can have something to deal with China. And last, and this alliance also could serve as another instrument for the United States to rein in South Koreans if the South Koreans want to do some things in a very aggressive and dangerous ways the United States side, American side does not like. So that's the defensive roles. But on the offensive roles, we like to see such roles may become increasingly prominent. The offensive roles include the alliance could help to enforce United Nations Security Council's resolutions, include intercept DPRKs, ban cargo, and make on-spot investigations and events, put DPRKs, cargo boats, and detentions. And also this alliance could generate significant pressures on the DPRKs to fuel intra-elite or intra-parties power struggles, bankrupting North Korea's economies, and forcing decision makers like Kim Jong-un to make fatal mistakes. And the last component of the offensive roles is that the alliance may intervene in the DPRKs if something's happened in other countries, include some contingencies, large-scale chaos, if large scales erupt in other countries, and this alliance would become a convenient instrument for United States and South Korea to intervene. But now, if the South Koreans want to achieve its unifications, it must rely on the strengthened alliance with the United States. But strengthened alliance between two countries pose some kind of a paradox to South Koreans. On the one hand, South Korea needs ROK and the United States alliance to fulfill its unification aspirations. No doubt about it. Without the United States support, and I don't think Korean unification could be achieved easily, at least. But a strengthened allied relationship with the United States pose some kind of a threat to China, and will discourage China's from supporting South Korean-led unification campaigns, and in turn undermines South Koreans' effort to accomplish national unifications. So this is the paradox. But how to solve this paradox? From Chinese perspectives, certainly, so no matter what the relationship between China and the United States will evolve in the future, good, bad, even good, China's government does not want the United States to put forces on the Korean Peninsula and other area on China's periphery. And this is the lines. I think I hate to say the bottom lines, but this is assumptions and China's insist on for a lengthy period of time, and in the future, and believe China will continue to insist on such a kind of positions. United States mutual forces must go if these national unifications on the Korean Peninsula are accomplished. And but for South Koreans, for my observations, United States mutual forces is certainly needed, because even the unification is accomplished, the United Korean need to take at least 10 years to put its house in order. and chaos may take place. External relationship may worsen. So the United States military presence on the Korean Peninsulas is needed from DPRK, United Koreans' perspectives. But for the time being, there are two major thinkings, proposals made by Korean scholars to settle these issues. One is to ask the United States to remain in place, remain military forces on Korean Peninsulas, as I discussed a little bit earlier. And another group of scholars maintained that neutral and denuclearized Korea, United Korea is wanted. So there some kind of phased out dissolutions of ROK and the United States alliance need to be done in the wake of unifications. But I like to say, for Korean government, for the time being and in the futures, and I believe they will take strategic positions on this issue to remain strategic ambiguities. And I think this strategic ambiguities and the future of the Korean ROK, Korean and U.S. alliance will remain dominant policies within the government. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, Professor Chang. Very interesting view from Chinese perspective on particularly defensive role and offensive role of the U.S.-ROK alliance. I'd like to make a short announcement. I got a message. We have to complete our discussion session by 6 p.m. because to enter the dinner place, we need the kind of security clearance. It will take more time. So we have now 40 minutes, 3 speakers, and I recognize especially the presence of the Prime Minister, Right Honorable James Borger. So I'd like to invite him to make a short intervention after our presentation. So could you, in that sense, could you make it short, remaining the presenters about 5 to 6 minutes? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for such a pleasant notification. My name is Hyun-Wook Kim, professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. I think I have heard the Scott and Xiaohe's presentations. I think that leads to the Korean government's puzzle, which means that after unification, how do Korea have to deal with the U.S.-ROK alliance? We don't want to maintain the U.S.-Korea alliance after the unification. That will be threatening China. So I think that it's one of the big issues in the middle of the unification process or even after the unification. But before we begin to discuss that issues, I think we need to think about what is the most realistic method and formula and way to achieve unification. Historically, North and South Koreas have developed different separate unification methods. South Korea first emphasizes economic exchanges and you use confederate system as a ways to achieve a long-term political integration. North Korea first emphasized the federations by which we have to deal with some of the hurdles and obstacles in political and military sense. But still, in the federal state, we maintain two different systems, political systems, which also do not guarantee a clear political integration. But in reality, I don't think there is any historical events that have achieved unification by either of these methods. Most of I think all of the unification process in history have been achieved by quick and clear and abrupt political integration, whether it's by absorption or whether it's by peaceful, gradual absorption, or whether it's by contingency. Even German case was achieved by West Germany taking initiative. Yemen case was also enabled by, using a military force. So I think most realistic way we can think of is peacefully absorbing North Korea, which was pretty much similar to the German case, or possibly we can think of a contingency case. But I think in reality, it's not really easy to achieve unification by contingency, North Korean contingency. I think nowadays the U.S., by hardening and hardening the pressure and sanctions on North Korea, possibly even expecting the possible regime collapse of North Korea, but I don't think that would really guarantee South Korean governments any possibility of unification. I don't want to elaborate all these things, but Scott mentioned about some of the elements of interventions. U.S., China, South Korea all have different interests when contingency happens. U.S. definitely wants to control WMD. China wants to deal with refugee issues and WMDs. But South Korea definitely wants to use contingency to achieve unification, which China does not welcome at all and does not guarantee unification. So I think the most realistic way to achieve unification is pretty much similar to the German case, which takes a kind of midterm time period. But I think that is a very peaceful absorption, most realistic way. Okay, so I think maybe we can think about what would be the future of the U.S.-South Korea alliance after unification. As I have mentioned in the beginning, I think the important puzzle for South Korean government is to maintain U.S.-Korea alliance after unification, which would not be threatening China. I think there should be very consistent and solid dialogue continue between China and South Korea, even after the unification, and making sure that to China that unified Korea would not be threatening China based upon the U.S.-South Korea alliance. First, I think the object of threat perception should be renewed. U.S.-South Korea alliance threat. The object of threats of the alliance is definitely North Korean threats, military development, not nuclear development of North Korea. But I think the threat perception of U.S.-South Korea alliance should be very unclear, widening towards a more regional and global issues, regional entities. There are many casualties that happens in Northeast Asia, and I think for the regional peace and stability, the U.S. and Unified Korea alliance should be operated, I think. And second important thing I can think of is that some of more operational level issues, which includes what should be the size and allocations of U.S. forces in the Unified Korea, and military command structure, so on and so forth. First, I think there should be dissolution of this Combined Forces Command. We don't need Combined Forces Command, and our military command structure should be changed to something really similar to the U.S.-Japan alliance. I think the foremost reason for this is that I think the ground forces of U.S. forces in Korea should be decreased. Most of the ground level military operations should be initiated by South Korea and Unified Korean military, and also focusing on the regional issues, strategic flexibility of U.S. forces in Korea should be much more emboldened. One more thing is the allocation issues. I think it's possible, as in the German case, that U.S. forces in unified Korea would be only stationed in the southern territory of the Korean Peninsula. In the northern territory, only Korean military would be stationed, And I think that would not be sufficient enough to convince China that U.S.-Korea alliance and also South Korean, the unified Korean government would not be threatening China. But I think that's something that we can think of now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Still, there's a differing view with China and United States are okay to be addressed and the process of reunification. And next, Professor Nishino from Keio University, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I will make 3 points as to unification. Number one, from the Japanese point of view, the most important point is that the unification of Korea should be managed in a peaceful manner. And at the same time, it is clear that for Japan that Japan support the unification led by South Korea, irrespective of unification process, because Japan and South Korea share the same values such as democracy and free market economy, and also share the lifestyle. And number two, it's also important by all means for Japan to involve in the unification process as a constructive and reliable supporter so that the unified Korea can have a better relationship with Japan. Frankly speaking, there's a concern in Japan that unified Korea might take tough stance toward Japan, or that national sentiment in the unified Korea will not be friendly to Japan because of our sad past. To avoid this, again, Japan want to and have to play a constructive role in the process of unification. And this will mean that Japan will become a meaningful financial supporter for sharing the unification cost. And number three, if contingencies happen on the Korean Peninsula, Japan will not able to have control of the situation. Instead, South Korea will be and should be take a lead in addressing the situation. But meanwhile, the US and China will play a decisive role as a signatory of the armistice of the Korean War and allies of South and North Korea. So though how to respond to contingency on the Korean Peninsula is part of main effort of the Japanese security policy, efforts to prevent contingency in advance are more important than responses to the contingency. So in this context, missile defense system has been playing a very important role for Japan to show our strong resolution that we are well prepared not only for deterrence by punishment, but also for deterrence by denial. So the reality of the repeated North Korean nuclear test and launches of long-range missile calls upon Japan to increase deterrent power, mainly in accordance with close consultation with the United States and South Korea. So trilateral cooperation among Japan, the US, and South Korea has been a very important instrument, not only in the deterring North Korean military provocation, but also in engaging North Korea since 1990s. So given the fact that South Korea has been precautious about Japan's building defense capabilities, Japan has tried to enhance transparency and efficiency through security cooperation with South Korea. And lastly, on the US-ROK alliance after the unification, Japan anticipates the US-ROK alliance will continue to be a cornerstone of peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, not only in the process of the unification, but also after the unification. The reason is, number one, both the US-ROK alliance and the U.S.-Japan alliance have contributed to the Japanese security and the stability in the Northeast Asia since after the World War II. And number two, then two alliances could continue to serve as a robust security instrument for the Japanese security until Japan and the unified Korea build stronger trust relationship, or until multilateral security mechanism will work in Northeast Asia. And thirdly and finally, historically, the Korean Peninsula has been a flashpoint in Northeast Asia. And the withdrawal of the US forces in Korea might cause serious contention among the neighboring countries on the peninsula. So Japan does not want to repeat the history in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Of course, the future of the ROK and the US alliance should be decided by the two countries, but I personally hope that Japan, US and ROK alliance will remain strong and play a role of stabilizer in Northeast Asia. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nishino. The very interesting point, particularly last one. And our one discussant, Professor In. So if you make a short comment on 4 presentations, it would be appreciated.
All right. Thank you, Ambassador Shin. I'll make it short. I'd like to pick up 3 points of what to consider just right after the reunification of Korean Peninsula. It's like a hypothetical things. First of all, what is common threat in between two countries? I think when it comes to alliance formation, one of the most important components to be considered should be the common threat perception, shared the opinion, shared analysis. But in the aftermath of reunification of Korean Peninsula, what would be the common threat to maintain so-called raucous alliance in the future? Maybe we can easily think of the Chinese presence, rise of China in the region. Yes, it could be the common threat for both countries, but also China would be the #1 trade partner, and which means that it's not only our threat, but also our #1 opportunities, which means it's like a unbalance in order to promote our raucous alliance in the future. So actually, one of the most important things at the moment is how can we identify that common threat to hold or to sustain the bilateral alliance after reunification in the region now. My second point is our partner's position, which means the U.S. leadership and the change of foreign policy. It's not strongly linked to the Donald Trump symptom, but anyway, many commentators and pundits say U.S. has changed in foreign policy now, and U.S. is standing at the crossroad in between so-called internationalism and isolationism. It is quite clear that Asia has been becoming much more important to the United States. Still, we can sense so-called, but at the same time, we can sense some sort of the leading from the behind, particularly initiated by the Obama administration over the last 8 years, approached by the United States. So which indicates the United States would not be actively involved or engaged when contingency happens. So I'm very much concerned about Trump's position in particular at the moment. So I'd like to hear from my colleague, Scott, from that point. My last point is chances for the regional multilateral architecture after reunification. After reunification of Korean Peninsula, there will be possible debates of U.S. as bilateral alliance with Korea should be upgraded to small multilateral security alliance based on regional context, we can easily assume tripartite security alliance among Korea, Japan, and the United States. But at the same time, we can imagine regional cooperative scheme like a BASETO, Northeast Asian countries community based on cultural context or economic prosperity or motivations. So what can you imagine after reunifying Korea in Northeast Asia when it comes to the multilateral architecture based on security or economic prosperity? Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor In. And now, Prime Minister, if you don't mind, you're now ready to make any comments on that.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I don't know. Back to the microphone. It works. Chairman, you are very generous to invite me without warning to contribute to this learned discussion with a range of professors and academics and, you know, ambassadors, etc. But thank you. I have. I'll touch very briefly on this tomorrow in my statement to the leader session. But it seems to me that we have now moved to a position, and I'm listening to all the presenters, where there is a common acceptance or desire that there should be unification. Now, that is a different position than when I entered politics, which was an awful long time ago. So I think that's one point. The second point is, if that is the goal, then I would just argue we need to then determine what the steps are. And the most important, and I've done a lot of negotiations at home, but not internationally, the most important thing is not to put up unnecessary barriers to get agreement on what can be achieved. Now, one of the issues I see here on the background papers on unification was a market-based economy. As the former leader of a centre-right government, I'm not sure what that means today. Printing trillions of dollars? Is that a centre-right economy or a market economy? Having vast monopolies? Having extraordinary division between the wealth within a society? Is that what the goal is? So I would move that to one side and say that's an issue to be worked through as the unification process moves forward. The unification process, I would presume, has as its goal a united Korea that will have the extraordinary challenge of bringing both halves of Korea up to a broadly common standard of living over a longer period. This was the great challenge in Germany, bringing in East Germany to West. The extraordinary brave decision of then Chancellor Kohl to recognise the East German mark as an equal value to the West German mark, when I surmise it was worth about a tenth. But that was the gesture to lift East Germany up to a position where they could interact on a more equal basis with West Germany. But that was a very considerable cost to the West. So that has to be worked through as well. That's an essential component of any unification that might come down the track. The third or fourth point I'd say is it's almost certain going to require external actors, participants, third-party countries to be part of the early stage of building confidence between the negotiators in the north and the south. I mean, that will be a requirement. It won't happen without. The other point, and I noticed as I was flying up from New Zealand yesterday, and I flew Korean Air, and they had the Korean Herald on. This is a plug for the Korean Herald, I suppose. On the plane, and I was reading the tentative outreach, and I read it from the paper only, of the North to start or want to start talking with the military in the South. I have no idea whether this has got weight. I noticed that it was instantly rejected, again, according to the paper. If we're talking and we're committed to unification, then you probably can't reject any outreach. You have to explore it a little further to see if there is any substance or whether it is a bit of a charade. So I think if I'm just standing here as a as a visitor from afar and a friend of Korea, then I'd say you'd have to do some of those issues. The word Trump was raised over on my right. I think it's raised for a very important point from my perspective. The fact that there could be a President Trump by November, sworn in next January, must raise a question: why is the United States citizens, why are the United States citizens likely to go down that path? In other words, the suggestion over here that this is some sea change in thinking, I think, is a very real one. I think the world is not concentrating on why these, what they would have normally called aberrant results, are coming through. And I suggest we better look at this term market economy. Too many are missing out. Too many are very unhappy, and they're making changes. I surmise there's many in this country as well. So those are my few thoughts on this. Oh, there was one other. Because my parents come from Ireland, I'm a first-generation New Zealander, I watched with some close interest the negotiations between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland that occurred a few years back. The issue of reunification, which is a passionately held position of many in the South, was not front and centre. It's in the agreement when the Northern Ireland citizens vote by majority vote to unify with the South. When or if that will happen is tomorrow's issue. What they wanted to achieve was a normalisation of relationship on the border so they weren't subject to terrorist attacks. So they had a subsidiary goal that was the important one in the short order. The longer goal, I'm sure for many of them in the South at least, is unification. So again, it's, from my perspective, the question of how do you progress towards the goal. It's unlikely you're going to hit it in one step. I won't enter into the discussion of what the relationship of the United States will be with a united Korea, other than to say I don't think there's anywhere in the world that the United States has had troops that has taken them all away. Scott might have a different view to that, I don't know, but I think that's right so far from my memory, so I surmise they'll still be here in some shape or form. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Prime Minister Borjo, some of your points is relevant and very useful to our discussions. We have the preparatory committee under the Blue House President Office, the chairperson now President Park Geun-hye. So some of your views, I passed your points to that commission to be taken into consideration or future work. Thank you very much. Yes, please. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You share your ideas and views with him. He's the right person to talk directly. Thank you. We have 15 minutes, so I suggest to the floor, the audience, to raise this, 2 or 3 questions first, and then maybe as a sum up, the wrapping up. So we like to ask the panelists to respond in the whole points as a single shot. Any questions from floor, raise your hand and identify yourself and make it shorter as soon as. Both in English or in Korean. We have translator. Ambassador Park, yes, so you have microphone. You are designated questionnaires.
The idea of being reunified it itself is luxurious as of now, because we are faced with ever-increasing tensions. So I'd like focused on the way to the reunification. Especially, I'd like to raise some question, Professor Chung from Renmin Daxue. I think the Chinese role will be ever increasing as time elapses. But But it is my understanding that in 2009, the Chinese Central Party has some important decision. Just understanding, that there's some two props, of the Chinese foreign policy toward Korean Peninsula. The one is the maintenance of peace and security of Korean Peninsula, and second, denuclearization. But in 2009, the party leadership, the meeting, 中央外事工作领导小组. What happened? What China will do in case of these two key elements conflict each other between peace and security and denuclearization? It is our understanding that Chinese party prioritize peace and security over denuclearization. That decision may mislead China, North Korea. So, and at the same time, that decision might be a source of some impression that China became more assertive than before. So now it's a very good opportunity for Chinese government to send some signals. Now Chinese Central Party, Chinese party has changed its, its conventional basic point. So that kind of thing might be symbolize the real intention and readiness for China to maintain peace and security, and also denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in parallel, without any sequence. And my second question is outside intervention in case of something happened in North Korea. Maybe, as you might be well aware, the international society, especially United Nations, has developed a new concept, as part of universal jurisdiction. So there is two regimes. One is R2P, responsibility to protect in case of something disturbance or some serious violence against humanity has happened in certain countries. And second, the creation of ICC, International Criminal Court. So as of now, if North Korean government wrongdoing is serious to the extent that which should invite international intervention, at that time, UN international community has two tools. One is indictment through the ICC, International Criminal Court, and also an invocation of R2P, just like a Libyan case. So international community has some legal the mandate to intervene in North Korean the international development. So maybe I'm sorry because I raised too many questions to you, but the Chinese position is very, very important and vital. So maybe I'd like to invite your personal ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Park. So any other questions from the floor? Okay. If you have no further questions, I'd like to ask the speakers, four speakers, to respond. Firstly, the question addressed directly to one of the presenter, and if you don't have any questions like that, so you just respond. You can respond in general, and whatever you like to add your points regarding this unification issue. So the same order. Scott, you're the first.
I guess I had a question about Trump. Just very brief. We could go on all day about this, so I really should be brief. I'm just going to make 2 points. One is there's actually nothing new about concerns regarding U.S. withdrawal from Korea historically that has been a periodic issue related to fears of abandonment. And so I think that, this is perhaps another phase in that kind of discussion. The second point is just to observe that what Trump appears to be putting forward as a basis for American foreign policy, America First, has really not been a dominant theme since the 1940s. And if you look at opinion polls like Chicago Council on Global Affairs, I think that it's true that the American public has been inclined towards some retrenchment, but I don't think that those polls show support for isolationism. In fact, I think those polls show support for prudent internationalism. And so any good politician, if they want to enjoy public support, I think they'll pay attention to those views.
Thank you, Scott Snyder. Professor Chang, you have many questions to answer. If I may add one more, you mentioned about the around 10 years period, transitional period. Until then, you said it is not necessary for the U.S. military to leave. So why you make it as kind of timeline within 10 years? Any specific ground? Why is 10 years and your conditionality?
Thank you also for the very challenging and excellent questions. And you see, China's policy toward Korea Peninsula could be characterized by three elements: one's peace, another one's stability, another one's denuclearizations, and also Chinese government emphasized the peace settlement of these issues. And frankly speaking, the three elements, there exist tensions between three elements. Without denuclearizations of the Korean Peninsula, how to maintain stability and peace on the peninsula? And that's some things, and every country, including China, needed to seek answers. We are in a dilemma. We are not in a clear-cut situations that we just need to seek single answers to such complicated questions. So there exist tensions between three elements. But from my observations, China's Wang Yi once mentioned, denuclearizations is the precondition for stability and peace on Korea Peninsula. And this statement actually is a highlight. The denuclearization is more important than the other two elements, stability and peace. But also, in the past years, the value of the three elements fluctuate from time to time. And as you mentioned, sometimes stability prioritizes over denuclearizations. But I'd like to say, even those Chinese decision makers' thinkings changes from time to time, but seeking denuclearizations of Korea Peninsula is China's determined policies. No change. And for the time being, I think it's denuclearizations occupy the most important positions in China's foreign policies toward Korea Peninsula. And to the second question's contingencies, and I think it's running out of time. 1 minute. And Chinese government never ever will rule out the possibilities of interventions, include military interventions. But from my understanding, such interventions could be conducted by unilaterally, bilaterally, and collectively with the blessings from the United Nations Security Councils, with the blessings from other consent of other key players like South Koreans and the United States, Japan, Russians. So that's the question, answer. To some Ambassador Shin's questions, 10 years, I think 10 years is the only number I like to throw out. Maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years. So that's the use of 10 years is just for the sake of the convenience.
Next, Professor Kim and
Yes, make it clear. I only answer only one question about the common threat perceptions between U.S. and unified Korea after the unification. I think in the document, the official documents, it will be only to deal with regional threats, regional maritime threats, or regional some other issues that is not specifically targeting states. But unofficially, I think the U.S. would think about common threat perception as targeting China. But South Korea would not think that way. So I think in that sense, unofficially, there will be some divergence in common threat perception between United States and unified Korea. South Korean position, I don't think would be really targeting China. And I think in that sense, even though the U.S.-Korea alliance is maintained with unofficially diverging threat perceptions, I think the operational level would be only, covering the regional issues, not only specifying the specific countries.
Thank you. The last, Professor Nishino.
Thank you. The common threat for future ROK alliance, I don't know, but maybe the instability and confusion on the Korean Peninsula. I think it will take a long time to realize real unification, integration of South and North Korea, because you had a very sad history of civil war. And as the multilateral mechanism in Northeast Asia, I think it will largely depend on the process of the unification. If unification happen in a peaceful manner by compromise between the South and North Korea, then it will be possible to establish a kind of 2+2 formula, South and North Korea and the United States and China. But if happen the sudden collapse of North Korea, then it will largely depend on the U.S.-China relations. So if U.S.-China rivalry very severe, then it's very hard to establish the kind of a multilateral formula for the time being. Thank you.
Proceed, you don't? Okay. So its time is already off, so I have no time to summarize, but only one point is, so our presenter speakers commonly mentioned about the prospect and the possibility of reunification is coming. So any contingent situations, so we need to prepare. So one historian said the reunification will not come as planned. It will come by accident. So we don't know how that the future situation will be developed in the Korean Peninsula. But from our perspective, we need to prepare. In that sense, the more importantly, that our cooperation and coordination and communication with our neighboring countries is more important and urgently needed. So that's why our president, our government is now having the bilateral, trilateral strategic dialogue to prepare any possible situation in the near future. Thank you very much. 1 minute over now. So please, big applause to the 4 presenters. I'm closing this session.